Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 6, Episode 9, Battle of the Bastards, the Meereen Storyline. So I'm going to do something really unique for this episode since I have a lot to say about this episode. Instead of making 1 hour-long video, I'm going to split my review of Episode 9 into 2 videos since there were 2 storylines in this episode, Meereen and the North. I'll do one for each as I have a lot to say about both storylines. So first, I'll have to give a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 6, Episode 9. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, it will not contain other kinds of spoilers like from production leaks or from the novels. So let me just be completely upfront. Although I just watched this episode and may need some more time to let it set in, I think it's a really strong possibility that I will consider it the best episode of the entire series. It's almost impossible for me to convey how much I love this episode. I nearly set up cameras to record my reactions before I watched this episode. I almost wish that I did, but I was too eager to watch the episode and I couldn't be bothered. But maybe it's for the best that I didn't, as it would have been a bit embarrassing, as it would have just been me squealing with joy like a little girl throughout most of the episode, especially the Daenerys scenes. Now, I will admit there was a lot of fan service in this episode, but it was fan service of the best kind, because here's the thing about Game of Thrones. It's noted as a show where anyone can die. In fact, anyone who's a fan favorite tends to die. It's a dark show willing to go places no show has before. In the Screen Junkies' latest honest trailer, they refer to it as a show that constantly makes you want to kill yourself. So I actually think it's great storytelling and a great idea to have an episode with so much amazing payoff and giving the fans what they want to see. And in addition, the reason why these fan service scenes work so well is because they're few and far between. In a show where the hero wins the day at the end of every episode, it becomes really monotonous and boring and expected when the heroes win. However, in a show like this, where 90% of the time the characters we care about die or otherwise have horrible things happen to them, it's so much more satisfying when things actually go right for a change and right for them in such a big way. Because it's exactly because it's unexpected that makes it good. That being said, the entire episode wasn't just the heroes winning. There was a lot of setbacks, a lot of sad moments. Hell, we even get the death of a Stark in this episode, and that's something that Game of Thrones likes to do, picking on that family that we care a lot about. So even this episode was tempered by a lot of dark things happening, which again makes these scenes where the audience gets exactly what they want so much more satisfying. Now, getting to Meereen. So I had originally predicted that this episode would take place entirely in the North and that we wouldn't see Daenerys again until episode 10, and I am so very happy to be proven wrong. Has to say these scenes were amazing, I think, is a vast understatement. One of my favorite scenes in the entire series has always been the season 3 scene where Daenerys sacks Astapor with her dragons, and this scene was that scene on steroids, so even more amazing. So we start the episode with Tyrion dealing with Daenerys' return, and we get a very funny line where Tyrion says, "Oh, despite appearances, the city is on the rise." And as he says that, the pyramid they're in is rocked by cannon fire. That was funny. However, the main takeaway I get from what Tyrion is saying here is that he has a point. A lot of people, including myself, have bashed Tyrion's storyline this year, saying he kind of fucked up this year and wasn't being the clever Tyrion that we all remember from season 2. But I think Tyrion himself proves me wrong in this scene with a great counter argument, as he points out that he actually achieved a lot. Before he came to Meereen, it was a city bent on destruction, ready to tear itself apart. But after, he went through with it, it's now a bustling and thriving city full of people who support Daenerys. In fact, I kind of kick myself for missing that, as if you compare the first episode where Tyrion and Varys were touring the city, where there was lots of people starving, poverty-stricken, everyone's bad, there's signs saying Misa is a master, so people hate Daenerys, and you compare it to last week's episode where Tyrion and Varys were touring the city and it was thriving and healthy, full of Daenerys supporters everywhere, and he points out that it is exactly because of that progress that the Masters decided to attack the city. Also, I think it's worth pointing out that that's the reason why they switched from an internal conflict to an external conflict, because rather than, the internal conflict was using guerrilla tactics. That's because of what Tyrion did made the city thrive again, and everyone support Daenerys, which would diminish the power of the Sons of the Harpy, as not too many people would be willing to join them anymore because things are much better in the city. So they had to rely on an outside invasion instead, but coordinate with what remains of the Sons of the Harpy. Anyway, Tyrion points out why they got so desperate, because they couldn't allow Meereen to thrive, as it proves that cities are better off without slavery, which is the main thing that the slavers cannot abide. So that was Tyrion's ultimate mistake, that he didn't see this coming and thought that the masters would simply be satisfied with wealth and he could just pay them off, and underestimated their attachment to the traditions of slavery. So Tyrion did make a mistake, and he's not perfect, but other than that one mistake, which was a big one, he actually did a lot to help Daenerys' situation in Meereen, which before he arrived was much more tenuous. So Daenerys acknowledges this and says, that's good, but it's, time to begin. Tyrion then asks if she has a plan, and she lays it out, and it's to crucify the masters, set their fleets on fire, kill every last one of their soldiers, and return their cities to the dirt. Tyrion, of course, is not on board with this plan and warns her about the Mad King and that she should avoid becoming like him. He does this by particularly telling her about how the Mad King had caches of wildfire hidden throughout King's Landing at key locations ready to set the entire city on fire, which I believe is a very specific foreshadowing for another storyline, but I'll cover that more in another video. At any rate, I think this interaction between Tyrion and Daenerys is really important here, as it speaks to something I hear a lot of people talking about, how Daenerys is likely to become the new Mad King and go mad with rage, and how she is actually more of a villain than a hero, which is something I've never been on board with. First, as far as her being like the Mad King, I think she does have that aspect of her, as her initial plan is quite brutal and would be along the same lines, which is a good thing. Tyrion is there to help her see the light. I've talked about this before, about how Daenerys needs strong advisors like Jorah or Barristan, and when they were both gone, she was really going downhill, and so she needed Tyrion, who I think is in fact her best advisor yet, as he knows a lot about politics and how to play people. But more specifically, Daenerys actually took Tyrion's advice, which proves to me that she is not like the Mad King, because if she were, she would have never listened to him. It's true that her first instinct was to just kill them all, but she was wise enough to heed Tyrion's advice and go with a much smarter plan, which to me shows that she is a good leader, as she's able to acknowledge a better plan when she sees it. And of course, the reason his plan is better is because instead of burning cities with innocents in them and killing soldiers who are just slaves, she gives them a chance to live and let them see how she's actually better than the masters whom they serve, which is a much smarter thing to do. As for Daenerys being a villain who's going to bring a bunch of, Dothraki savages to rape and pillage people in Westeros, well, people who say that should be hired to write propaganda pieces for the Lannisters. Daenerys has obviously changed the nature of the Dothraki and will not tolerate them raping and pillaging, as she made clear in the next scene with Yara Greyjoy that I'll get into shortly, where she made the Ironborn swear off of reaping and raiding. Also, she freed millions from slavery and ended whole, brutish and savage practice, which had nothing to do with herself. It was very altruistic motivations. If Abraham Lincoln isn't a villain, then neither is Daenerys. Sure, she has a fiery temper when serving, a righteous cause, like sticking up for people and trying to abolish slavery, but she's wise enough to take advice from people who know better, like Tyrion. In fact, the more I think about it, her and Tyrion are the perfect match in a dream team certainly to be reckoned with. So then we get this amazing scene, which I think is fair to say has become my new favorite scene of the entire series, where Daenerys, Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Missandei meet to negotiate with the Wise Masters. The Wise Master of Yunkai acts all arrogant and even berates Daenerys for being arrogant to him back in Season 3, and demands that they leave the city on foot and return the Unsullied that they stole. However, what happens next is just so fucking awesome. Again, it's like the sacking of Astapor scene where she reveals that she actually speaks Valyrian and she sets the masters on fire, but times 1,000. She was like, we're not communicating properly. We're not here to talk about my surrender. We're here to talk about your surrender. I was just squealing at that. It was just so awesome. So the masters still act all arrogant. So Drogon shows up, perches on top of the pyramid, and this huge, then he crashes straight down right next to Daenerys. She doesn't even blink. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't move a muscle. And you get this huge dragon hit right next to her. She just calmly mounts him and flies away. I think it goes without saying, I was absolutely squealing at this scene, and I have to say I strongly believe this is the single most badass moment in the entire series. So she rides Drogon as he flies over the city, and as he does, the other two dragons burn through the pyramid that they were in and join her and Drogon in attacking the fleet. So it was unclear in episode 2 when Tyrion unchained the dragons whether they were still in the pyramid or not. Some said that they were, while others saying that they weren't. Myself, I wasn't really sure either way, as I don't really think they properly addressed this. But apparently they were still in there, but unchained. I have a feeling they could have left at any time, but didn't, as the show has established that they were actually kind of depressed when Daenerys wasn't there. However, the show has also established that dragons have a strong psychic bond with Daenerys and can sense when she's nearby or in danger or need them, or that she needs them to attack. So it's obvious they could sense that she needed them, so they just broke through the catacombs to join her and Drogon in the attack. So as they fly by the entrance of the city, we pan down to see the Sons of the Harpy attacking people on the ground, but they soon are overwhelmed by a Dothraki horde led by Daario, and the Dothraki very, very easily run down the Sons of the Harpy, and we even get this one brief scene, which I think is representative of the Dothraki completely wiping out the Sons of the Harpy movement, who at this stage were in full attack mode rather than in hiding. So they were ripe for this overwhelming force of Dothraki to just wipe them out. So I think it's fair to say that this is the end of the Sons of the Harpy. Plus, I have to point out the symbolism that I love of Daario chopping off the head of the Sons of the Harpy, which we see that Sons of the Harpy mask with the head on it go flying, which I think is very symbolic of the death knell of a particular fan theory involving Daario and the Sons of the Harpy, but I won't get too much into that in this video, but I really appreciated that symbolism. So, then another amazing, awesome scene where Daenerys flies Drogon over the fleet, and with the two other dragons, they make easy ways to this fleet, and they burn a couple of ships down. It was so amazing. I have to say, it was the best dragon action sequence that we have ever gotten in the entire series. And I love me some dragon sequences, if you can't tell by now. Before the season started, the showrunners promised some of the best, most expensive dragon sequences that we've ever seen, and I think they completely delivered on that point. It was just so awesome. So, back to the Masters. They're parlaying with Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Missandei, who are, of course, in an entirely different position now, as they pretty much lost in a single moment. And now it's Grey Worm's turn to have a badass moment, as he speaks directly to the slaves serving the Masters and tells them that they don't have to die for masters who care nothing about them and can instead just go home to their families. And, of course, this plea is a lot more effective than it would have been before, because at this point they knew that the Masters lost and would probably die if they put up a fight. So they simply just laid down their weapons and ran away, which was such an awesome sequence. It made me laugh out loud. But more than that, I think it was representative of what was happening over the entire series, that the that the slaves serving the masters were giving up, or would give up, throughout the entire city. I don't think this was an isolated incident, as later Tyrion says thanks for the ships, and they talk about how they're going to take the ships the masters left behind, which indicates that the dragon didn't burn the entire fleet. So it seems likely she set a few ships on fire, and after that destruction, many of the slave armies just gave up. It's like later in the episode when Jon Snow talks about the people who serve Ramsay just do so out of fear and not out of loyalty, and so his support would disappear as soon as it looks like that he was going to lose. And I think the same logic definitely applied equally here in Meereen, if not more so. So then we get a badass Tyrion moment where he tells the masters that they betrayed him for defying their agreement, and because of this, one of them must die, which is another great thing of why they had this agreement. Anyway, the master of Yunkai and Volantis immediately push forward Yizan, the master of Astapor, and say, kill him because he's lowborn, he's not really one of us. And it makes me wonder, how stupid are they? Because don't they realize that by saying these things that it would actually make Yizan more, appealing to Grey Worm and Daenerys, because who are actually against slavery. So indeed, Yizan kneels and begs for his life, and when he does, Grey Worm simply slices the throats of the other two masters in one swipe, which is another badass Grey Worm moment. So then Tyrion puts his hand on Yizan's shoulder, who thought he was going to die, which I thought was quite ironic, because I was remembering that Tyrion was once a slave of Yizan and had to beg for his life to him, and now the positions are reversed. But he lets Yizan live to be a messenger to make sure anyone else who has these crazy ideas to attack Daenerys or defy them, they know what's going to happen with Daenerys and her dragons, and they know that they have to realize to accept the new order of things. So it seems that this marks the end of slavery for good, and the end of the resistance against Daenerys Targaryen in Slaver's Bay. Hence, she has won. However, I find myself wondering about Volantis, because one of the masters that they killed was from Volantis, and they were also involved in this attack, but Volantis is very far away from Slaver's Bay. So does this mean slavery is outlawed there as well? If so, who controls the city? I hope these questions are addressed, even if it is just in like one piece of throwaway dialogue. So another point I wanted to make about the scene where Daenerys roasts the ships with her dragons, as I'm sure some will find this scene too fantasy-like for their taste, which is fine. Everyone has different taste. However, anyone who says it's out of character for the show, they are outright wrong. First off, the show has been building to the scene like ever since the dragons were first hatched in the season 1 finale, as we were just waiting for them to grow larger enough to wreck ships and wreak this kind of havoc. Now, they have. Secondly, it's in keeping with the novels as well, as it's part of the extended lore of the story of Aegon the Conqueror, who used 3 dragons to conquer Westeros. And this is something they've been talking about all over the show as well. And it's been very clear foreshadowing to me that that's where Daenerys' storyline is heading as well, a more modern version of Aegon's conquest. Now, through the tales of Aegon's conquest, we also learned what an effective weapon a of war that the dragons are, and they're basically weapons of mass destruction that can easily win battles. So it was so great to finally see an example of that on the show. At any rate, I made a video a while back called Lessons from Aegon's Conquest, where I talk about the significance that Aegon's conquest could have on the future of our present day story, and I think it's a lesson people often forget about. Anyway, I'll put a link in the description below for anyone who wants to check out that video. So later on in the episode, we get another scene in Meereen where Yara and Theon have arrived and speak to Daenerys and Tyrion about forming an alliance. I was kind of curious of how Tyrion would react to a proposed Greyjoy alliance, as he himself has been a strong proponent of Daenerys making alliances with important families of Westeros. So I thought he would be totally behind it, but instead he seems fixated on the fact that Theon cracked a few dwarf jokes about him several years ago. Seems like quite a pity grudge to hold, but I suppose it was more indicative of Theon's entire character. So Daenerys then asks if they want her support to support Theon's claim to the Iron Islands, but they clarify it's Yara's claim, which I think is a big plus for Daenerys, especially when she talked about how, there's never been a queen on the Iron Islands before, and part of the request is to take care of a few uncles who think a woman isn't fit to rule, which again would look very favorably to Daenerys. So I was wondering before who she would choose, Yara or Euron, and why. Some might say Euron would look more favorably as he has way more ships, which is a point they even bring up, but the fact that his alliance only comes under the condition of marriage is a pretty good reason for Daenerys to refuse. Plus the fact that he likely would kill her once he has what he wants, which is the whole Seven Kingdoms, whereas Yara is just happy with the Iron Islands. So in other words, they did a good job of selling this alliance, so Daenerys is on board. It's interesting how Tyrion was like, well, you can't have everyone demand independence, and Daenerys' response was, well, she's not demanding, she's asking. And that was a really good response. And as I mentioned earlier, Daenerys made Yara promise that the Ironborn would do no more reaping, raiding, or pillaging, which honestly will weaken Yara's position with the rest of the Ironborn, who won't be happy about that. Plus, Yara is asking for Daenerys to give her the Iron Islands, which is the same promise Robb Stark made to Balon Greyjoy, who rejected it, saying the Iron Islands they must pay the iron price for the Iron Islands. And at the time, Yara agreed with him, but I suppose she's smarter now and also a bit desperate with Euron hot on her trail. I wonder how Euron is going to deal with this new alliance. With the threat of the dragons, I wonder if he'll give in to Yara and Theon. I guess we'll just have to see. Either way, this scene is pretty much confirmation Daenerys is gearing up to return to Westeros. After all, Slaver's Bay is safe now, the Masters are finally defeated, the Sons of the Harpy are wiped out, and now Daenerys has her first official Westerosi ally, House Greyjoy, and pretty much the whole Iron Islands, assuming that she can help Yara take them from Euron. So it still begs the question of where Varys went to as he was seeking allies. It'd be kind of messed up if he was going to Euron, because it would really make things complicated. So I don't think that's the case. I think it is either Dorne or the Tyrells. I kind of doubted Dorne after the way they fumbled its storyline at the start of the season. It might make sense for Daenerys to make an alliance with the Sand Snakes. Then it would be an alliance of strong women. I guess along the lines of those same lines, the Queen of Thorns would also make sense as well. So we'll just have to see. Either way, I think it's highly likely Daenerys leaves for Westeros next episode. I'm still wondering if she's gonna leave Grey Worm and Missandei and some of the Unsullied behind. It would make sense to me, as she needs to maintain some presence in Meereen, otherwise things could fall right back into chaos. And also makes sense Grey Worm would be more invested in keeping Slaver's Bay slavery free rather than conquering Westeros. But maybe not. I don't know. Maybe his devotion to Daenerys is too strong and he'd rather keep that friendship. I don't know. We'll see. So, one last observation on Daenerys before I go, as some had talked about Daenerys' storyline of being one where everything always goes her way and she always gets what she wants. While it may seem that way if you look back at the last 5 episodes, I feel though that the people who say that have a very short memory, as in season 4, things started really going downhill for her. She lost her closest advisor, Jorah, the wise masters retook Yunkai, and she had to lock up her dragons, and things got even worse for her in season 5, where a powerful resistance movement sprung up in Meereen, which was very effective in fighting her and killing off people. She lost her remaining advisor, Barristan Selmy, and things got so bad she had to marry a wise master to keep the peace, and even that didn't work, as she and her closest advisors were almost killed in a massive attack in the fighting pits. And this season, she literally began the season with her hands bound and being dragged, by the Dothraki on horses, talking about how they were going to rape her. And after that, it looked like she was going to be stuck living in Vaes Dothrak for the rest of her life. So I'd say up until that point where she burned the cows alive in the tent, things have been going massively bad for her for the past several years. So I totally do not get this line of thinking that everything always goes her way. Sure, since that, everything's been going pretty great for her, and she's been managing to kick some massive ass, but frankly, I think that's totally needed to move the story forward, and it is in fact great storytelling, and it's about time to finally get her moving back to Westeros and to do that, they needed to take care of the situation in Meereen, which is now done. So, onwards to Westeros. So that's it for my Meereen Storyline review of Episode 9. I'll give my final thoughts, rating, and conclusion of Episode 9 in Part 2 of this review, the North Storyline, which I'll leave a link to in the description below, so be sure to check that out. Also, check out my discussion that I'll be doing Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the US, which will be 11 a.m. Tuesday for me here in New Zealand, where I'll be discussing this episode with my brother Epkin Tomko and our very special guest, Phil the Issues Guy. I absolutely cannot wait for that discussion. I'll leave a link in the description below for that video as well. So make sure to subscribe so you can keep up with many more Game of Thrones videos to come, and thanks a lot for watching.